In the spring of 1940, an unnatural thunder was gathering in the forests of the Ardennes. It was the sound of an army moving with a speed and ferocity that seemed to defy the laws of nature itself. Panzer divisions surged through terrain the French had deemed impassable, a relentless column of steel that did not stop for over 72 straight hours. For the Allied strategists watching in disbelief, it was a military impossibility unfolding in real time. They could not know that this offensive was powered not only by diesel engines and doctrine, but by a tiny white pill that nullified sleep, erased fear, and pushed the human body far beyond its breaking point. The entire concept of Blitzkrieg rested on this single brutal demand: continuous high-speed advance, day and night without rest. It required a soldier who could remain fully operational long after exhaustion should have crippled him. This was the strategic problem that German military science sought to solve, not with training, but with chemistry. The solution was a new synthetic stimulant that had begun to circulate through Germany: Pervitin. This was the first commercial version of methamphetamine, and its potential was immediately recognized by Dr. Otto Friedrich Ranke, the director of the Institute of Military Physiology in Berlin. In his clinical view, Pervitin was the pharmacological key to unlocking a new kind of soldier. His early tests revealed that the drug not only prolonged wakefulness, but enhanced concentration and, crucially for combat, suppressed anxiety. After a trial run during the invasion of Poland, the High Command went all in. The Temmler-Werk pharmaceutical company received an order to produce more than 35 million tablets, destined exclusively for the Western Front. On the battlefield, the impact was immediate and profound. An internal report from the 1st Panzer Division described drivers who could operate their vehicles for 2 days and 2 nights without interruption, their eyes fixed on the narrow roads, their hands steady on the controls. Artillery officers, whose work demanded precise mathematical calculations, maintained their unblinking focus even after 60 hours without sleep. In the infantry, soldiers who had marched for 80 kilometers still possessed the raw energy to assault defensive positions upon reaching their objective. At the Meuse River near Sedan, this chemical advantage became decisive. Engineering units built bridges under constant enemy fire, their movements efficient and fearless, as if they were immune to the chaos around them. The crossing was a brilliant success, but this chemically induced bravery carried a terrible unseen price. The sound of the advance was relentless, a mechanical hum that never ceased. Under a constant hail of enemy fire, German soldiers moved with an unnerving calm, showing no sign of fatigue or fear. Witnesses saw men working like automatons, methodically continuing their tasks as explosions erupted around them, their actions defying the most basic instincts of self-preservation. This superhuman efficiency bewildered the Allies. One captured French officer expressed his astonishment that German units, after fighting for 3 consecutive days, displayed the same ferocious intensity as fresh troops. In London, Winston Churchill was perplexed by reports of armored columns advancing day and night without pause, a feat that contradicted every established principle of military rest and rotation. This unnatural stamina was not confined to the ground. In the skies, Luftwaffe pilots relied on the same chemical edge for long-range missions and night bombings, nicknaming the pills Stuka tablets, or, with dark irony, Hermann Göring pills. One Heinkel bomber pilot later described a state of conscious dissociation, a feeling of being awake in a dream, his mind detached from the horror his hands were unleashing below. This was no battlefield improvisation, but a meticulously planned chemical campaign. Pervitin was integrated directly into the Army's logistics chain, with standardized doses and protocols. For critical operations like the push through the Ardennes, commanders ordered higher amounts, prioritizing tactical speed over the long-term health of their men. The immediate results were staggering. The Wehrmacht accomplished in 6 weeks what it had failed to do in 4 years during the First World War: the complete surrender of France. General Heinz Guderian's panzers tore across more than 400 kilometers of territory in just 10 days, a pace previously unimaginable in the history of warfare. Yet, beneath the surface of this triumph, the chemical foundation was beginning to crack. Internal medical reports documented cases of physical collapse and cardiovascular failure. After 50 hours without sleep, one tank driver, lost in a waking nightmare, suffered hallucinations and rammed his own infantry column, killing 3 soldiers before he could be stopped. These alarming reports were systematically ignored. The High Command, dazzled by the Blitzkrieg's spectacular success, saw only victory. The fall of France seemed to confirm that the gamble had paid off, validating the idea of a pharmacologically enhanced soldier. A new kind of warrior had been forged by German science, one capable of overcoming human limits but at a terrible unseen cost. In the shadow of the front lines, a far more sinister application of chemistry was taking root. While the Wehrmacht deployed Pervitin to conquer fatigue, another branch of the Nazi apparatus used it to conquer the soul, systematically stripping away human empathy to fuel the machinery of extermination. Within the concentration camps, the Schutzstaffel found that a cocktail of methamphetamines, morphine, and alcohol could transform ordinary men into merciless instruments of death. Unlike in the army, where the objective was heightened performance, here the drugs served a darker psychological purpose. They were a tool to dissolve the moral barriers that would otherwise interfere with the execution of industrial-scale atrocities. At Auschwitz, Majdanek, and Treblinka, guards were immersed in an environment where unimaginable suffering was the daily norm. The constant exposure to mass death and decomposition, the systematic murder of thousands of men, women, and children, threatened to shatter even the most ideologically committed minds. The regime's solution was a specific combination of substances to induce a state perfectly suited for their duties. Pervitin supplied aggression and alertness, morphine provided a hollow emotional void, and alcohol ensured obedience and a clouded memory. This chemical regimen created guards who were hypervigilant, yet profoundly disconnected, capable of maintaining meticulous records while losing all capacity to recognize the humanity before them. A documented case from the Majdanek camp reveals this perverse dynamic in chilling detail. An SS officer, Untersturmführer K, adhered to a strict pharmacological routine: Pervitin at dawn, vodka throughout his shift, and a morphine injection at dusk. Witnesses recalled how he could shift from bureaucratic calm to eruptions of savage violence with no visible transition. During one selection in 1943, he stood on the arrival ramp for 14 hours, sending thousands to the gas chambers with a mechanical motion of his hand, a gesture one survivor described as conducting an invisible orchestra. These selections were the most critical moments of the camp's operation, where doctors and officials decided who would be granted a temporary reprieve as a slave laborer and who would be sent directly to their death. Such decisions, determining the fate of thousands in an instant, were frequently made under the haze of stimulants and opioids. The result was a lethal and terrifying arbitrariness, where the young and strong might be condemned while the frail were selected for impossible work. Dr. Eduard Wirtz, the chief physician at Auschwitz, was known to perform these selections only after receiving what his aides called the preparation. Witnesses spoke of his glazed eyes and a complete unnerving indifference to the suffering around him, the clear signs of a man whose conscience had been chemically erased. Within the camp's sterile infirmaries, science itself was being corrupted, revealing clear signs of a pharmacologically induced madness. Beyond enabling the daily horrors of the extermination machine, these drugs served an even more sinister purpose, fueling medical experiments that twisted prisoners into unwilling test subjects. Pervitin was administered not just to guards, but to inmates, part of grotesque studies on the limits of human endurance. At Dachau, the infamous Dr. Zygmunt Rascher merged his hypothermia trials with stimulant testing. Prisoners were forced into tanks of ice-cold water until their bodies neared collapse, only to be injected with varying doses of methamphetamine. The official objective was to find ways to revive downed pilots from the North Sea, but the methods guaranteed only an agonizing death for the subjects. Meanwhile, at Sachsenhausen, a different torment unfolded on a circular track where prisoners were made to run for days. Fueled by controlled doses of Pervitin, their physical endurance was measured until the point of total breakdown. Every spike in heart rate, every labored breath, every degree of body temperature was meticulously recorded. This grim data, charting the path to physical decomposition, was sent to the High Command to refine drug dosages for soldiers on the front lines. The perversity of the system was sealed in this ghastly feedback loop. As the SS used drugs to numb themselves to human suffering, they simultaneously exploited that same suffering to perfect the military application of those substances. The camps had become more than killing centers. They were now laboratories where Nazi science explored the breaking points of the human body. By 1944, with the war effort collapsing, drug consumption in the camps surged to critical levels. Facing imminent defeat, many guards escalated their doses, descending into increasingly erratic and violent behavior. During the forced evacuations ahead of the Allied advance, survivors described guards who seemed to need no sleep, maintaining a feverish, aggressive vigilance for days before crashing into states of total disorientation. During the evacuation of Majdanek, guards visibly intoxicated with stimulants executed more than 200 prisoners who were too weak to keep up. Witnesses recounted their compulsive movements and accelerated, incoherent speech, their actions marked by a mechanical precision, as if they were in a trance. When Allied troops finally liberated the camps in 1945, they found not only the evidence of genocide, but also thousands of medication bottles, syringes, and records documenting this systematic chemical abuse. The captured guards themselves were a testament to the program, many exhibiting the tremors, paranoia, and acute withdrawal of severe dependency. The fusion of genocidal ideology and chemical alteration had produced a reality that transcended even the worst known cruelties. These substances did not create the Holocaust, but they had served as a powerful lubricant for its machinery, dissolving the last vestiges of humanity that might have interfered with methodical extermination. The air in the wolf's lair hung thick with cigar smoke and unspoken fear. On July the 3rd, 1941, just 11 days into the invasion of the Soviet Union, Hitler convened an extraordinary meeting with his generals. For 8 straight hours, the Führer's voice filled the room, a torrent of strategic brilliance mixed with wild messianic prophecies. He then retreated briefly with his personal physician, Theodor Morell, only to reappear minutes later, eerily calm and prepared to absorb reports as if the marathon briefing had never occurred. The episode offered a glimpse into a secret that would shape the course of the war, deactivating the last internal checks on a mind bent toward extermination. This was the hidden reality of the Third Reich. Adolf Hitler, the master of Europe's destiny, operated under a daily drug regimen that profoundly warped his military decisions and personal stability. He was not simply a leader with conventional health issues, but a functioning addict whose chemical imbalances would have devastating consequences for millions. The architect of this state was a man few respected, Theodor Morell. This corpulent, disheveled doctor with unorthodox methods became the guardian of Hitler's health and, increasingly, the chemical engineer of his mind. Though despised by Göring and Himmler, who called him the charlatan or the Reich poisoner, Morell enjoyed the Führer's absolute trust from 1936 onward. Their bond was forged when Morell seemed to cure the severe digestive ailments that had long plagued the hypochondriac leader, using a strange combination of intestinal bacteria and unusual remedies. Hitler, deeply impressed, told him, No one has ever helped me like you, doctor." It was the beginning of a reliance that would soon extend far beyond medicine. Medical records, once hidden, now paint a staggering picture of this dependency. Between 1941 and 1945, Morell administered at least 82 different substances. A typical chemical breakfast for the Führer in 1943 included a mixture of glucose, vitamins, testosterone, the stimulant methamphetamine known as Pervitin, and even small doses of strychnine. Throughout the day, more injections followed to manage his moods and energy. Eucadal, a substance similar to oxycodone, was used to blunt the edges of stress, while animal organ extracts were supposed to bring vitality. At night, barbiturates or potassium bromide completed the cycle, plunging the leader of the Third Reich into a forced artificial sleep. As the war's momentum shifted against the Reich, a deeper corrosion was setting in. It was not just on the battlefields, but within the very mind of its supreme commander. The disaster at Stalingrad in February of 1943 marked a point of no return. From then on, Dr. Morell's records chart a steep escalation in the frequency of injections, a dependence that mirrored the Reich's own desperation. Albert Speer, the Minister of Armaments, saw the transformation up close. The Führer was no longer the same man, his decisions swinging wildly between feverish optimism and bottomless despair. A pronounced tremor took hold of his hands, a weakness he tried to conceal by clasping them behind his back during tense meetings. His chronic digestive ailments worsened, now accompanied by a violent shaking in his left arm and leg, the likely onset of Parkinson's, accelerated by a torrent of stimulants. His skin acquired a lifeless grayish pallor, and his eyes lost their unnerving intensity. Multiple accounts speak of a persistent, unpleasant body odor that clung to him even after bathing, a sign of a metabolic system collapsing under the chemical onslaught. More alarming than the physical decay was his growing detachment from reality. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein would later recall that from 1943 onward, any coherent strategic discussion became impossible. The Führer would interrupt with rambling monologues, demand victories that were militarily unattainable, and simply ignore concrete data on Germany's crippling material shortages. 3 catastrophic decisions stand as monuments to this chemically fueled delusion. The order for the German Sixth Army to fight to the last man at Stalingrad was issued in November of 1942, while he was under a potent combination of Eucadal and Pervitin. Then came Operation Citadel, the doomed offensive at Kursk in July 1943, launched against the strenuous objections of his most experienced generals. An officer present remembered Hitler moments after an injection, declaring with chilling certainty, "I feel in my veins that this is the right moment. Inspiration has come." The battle ended in a ruinous defeat. By 1944, this delusion birthed the Volkssturm, a militia of untrained boys and old men ordered to defend Berlin to the death, fueled by his own conviction that phantom rescue armies, existing only in his imagination, were on their way. His conduct in military conferences had decayed just as dramatically. The man once famed for his encyclopedic memory of technical details now confused basic facts and forgot decisions made only days before. Recovered recordings capture the change. His speech pattern grew frantic, his thoughts scattered. He would interrupt his own generals to launch into furious tirades about imagined treason and incompetence. Japanese Ambassador Hiroshi Oshima, after a meeting in September 1944, wrote to Tokyo with alarm. The Führer, he reported, seemed a different man, his gaze erratic and his speech incoherent, his understanding of the war existing in a parallel reality. He spoke of counteroffensives and imminent victories, but he spoke like someone in a trance. Within Hitler's immediate circle, Dr. Morell became a point of intense division. Figures like Martin Bormann fiercely protected the doctor, seeing the daily drug regimen as essential to keeping the Führer functioning at all. Others, most notably Himmler and Göring, made repeated attempts to have Morell removed. They saw the doctor not as a savior, but as the agent of Hitler's accelerating destruction. On April 21, 1945, with the roar of Soviet artillery echoing through Berlin, the relationship finally shattered. Hitler abruptly dismissed Morell. The man who had spent 5 years under a constant chemical haze was suddenly cut off. What followed was a week of total collapse, witnessed by the terrified occupants of the bunker. Without his injections, Hitler could barely remain conscious. The tremors in his left side became so violent he could not walk without support, his once booming voice reduced to a frail, barely audible murmur. He would spend hours staring blankly into the middle distance, his stupor broken only by explosive fits of rage as the withdrawal symptoms took their agonizing hold. On April 29th, the day before his suicide, he dictated his political testament. Witnesses described a surreal tableau, a man trembling uncontrollably, his mind flickering between moments of chilling lucidity and rambling incoherence. He would stop mid-sentence, lost, only to resume on a completely unrelated tangent. The next day, on April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler took his own life. The body, seen by those who prepared it for cremation, was a testament to his final internal defeat. Emaciated, with jaundiced skin and rotting teeth, he was the ruin of a man, appearing not 56 years old but closer to 80. The forests of the Ardennes lay cloaked in a December frost. From this frozen landscape, Hitler ordered a final desperate gamble, a massive counteroffensive he believed could repeat the miracle of 1940. But the Wehrmacht that surged toward the Western Front was a mere specter of the force that had stormed across Europe 4 years prior. Fueled by a daily cocktail of drugs that warped his strategic judgment, the Führer sent forth an army on the verge of collapse. Its divisions were a patchwork of exhausted veterans, undertrained teenage recruits, and men rushed back to the front from hospital beds. Yet many shared a grim, unifying trait. Years of reliance on Pervitin and other stimulants had left indelible scars on their minds and bodies. What had begun as a tactical advantage was now an operational catastrophe. Long before Allied armor sealed its fate, the German army was unraveling from within. A confidential medical report from October 1944 estimated that between 60 and 70% of frontline soldiers on the Eastern Front had developed a dependency on Pervitin. For countless men, the tablets were no longer an aid for combat, but a basic requirement for survival. This grim reality is captured in a letter recovered from a veteran of the 16th Panzer Division. He wrote, "Without the pills, I can't stand the sound of the guns. My hands shake so much I can't aim. Only when I take the white medicine can I keep fighting." When Allied bombing campaigns shattered German logistics, interrupting the flow of these drugs, the consequences were immediate and devastating. Entire units began to experience simultaneous withdrawal. A wave of extreme anxiety, paranoia, and uncontrolled aggression swept through the ranks. A medical report from the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division described how, after just 5 days without their medication, an entire company simply ceased to function. More than half the men exhibited severe neuropsychiatric symptoms, seeing phantom enemies or collapsing into catatonic states. German military hospitals, already choked with the wounded, were overwhelmed by a new tide of patients suffering from acute psychiatric episodes. At the Smolensk Field Hospital, doctors established an entire ward for what they termed medication cerebral exhaustion, a clinical euphemism for addiction and methamphetamine psychosis. The enemy they fought was no longer just on the battlefield, but in their own minds. Dr. Wolfgang Gerhardt, a military psychiatrist at Smolensk, kept meticulous records between 1943 and 1944. His notes describe soldiers with permanent neurological damage, irreversible tremors, and recurrent psychotic episodes. "Some of these men," he wrote, "will never regain their capacity for normal life, even if they survive the war." Perhaps most alarming was the corrosion of internal discipline, the traditional bedrock of the German military. Commanders reported a surge in insubordination, desertion, and violence. In 1 month, the 27th Infantry Division documented 6 suicides, all involving soldiers who had been cut off from their Pervitin supply. Near Kursk, 2 desperate panzer soldiers attacked their battalion doctor for more tablets. One was shot by guards, the other executed. The incident was officially recorded not as a mutiny born of addiction, but as sabotage and treason. The damage was not only psychological. Young men in their 20s began to display heart conditions typical of old age, their autopsies revealing enlarged hearts and scarred arteries. In the 19th Panzer Division, a 22-year-old tank driver died suddenly during a routine march. The official report cited cardiac fatigue, but a private autopsy told a different story. Cardiac arrest induced by a stimulant overdose. The official reports told one story, the bodies of the dead told another. This affliction was not confined to the ground. The Luftwaffe, which had pioneered the use of stimulants, was now paying a staggering price. From 1943 onward, non-combat accidents soared. In a 3-month period, the fighter squadron JG-5 stationed in Norway lost 8 aircraft during takeoff or landing with no enemy intervention. The pilots, kept awake for over 48 hours on stimulants, had simply lost control. The German High Command was not entirely blind to the crisis. As early as 1942, Reich Health Minister Leonardo Conti warned of serious consequences, but his pleas for restriction were met with resistance. A major general bluntly replied, "Dr. Conti can worry about Germany's future health when we win this war. In the meantime, we need soldiers who can fight now." The tension between medical reality and military necessity was consistently resolved in favor of the latter. By the time general shortages finally forced a reduction in Pervitin distribution in 1944, the poison had already done its work. The veterans who survived carried their addictions home, fueling a mental health crisis documented by Allied occupation authorities. A 1947 American report noted the high number of veterans with psychiatric symptoms linked to wartime stimulant abuse, men unable to ever truly leave the war behind. Perhaps the most haunting summary came from Dr. Otto Ranke, the very man who had first promoted Pervitin's use. In a 1946 interview, he confessed with belated regret, "We thought we were strengthening our soldiers, but in reality, we were destroying them from within. You can't fool nature indefinitely." The Blitzkrieg's chemical fire had burned brightly, but it had consumed the army from the inside out, leaving behind only the ashes of a physical and moral collapse. In the humming laboratories of 1937 Berlin, a quiet chemical revolution was underway, one that would fuel the very engine of the Third Reich. As the nation rearmed, the pharmaceutical company Temmler-Werk, under the guidance of chemist Fritz Hauschild, was perfecting a crystalline compound. This substance promised to unlock human potential, to banish fatigue and elevate performance to an almost mechanical level. It was methamphetamine, and its commercial name, Pervitin, would soon echo in every corner of Germany. The story of Pervitin did not begin on the battlefield, but in the ambitious pharmaceutical industry of a nation desperate to reclaim its scientific prestige after the Treaty of Versailles. The Nazi regime, obsessed with technical superiority and national self-sufficiency, had elevated drug development to a strategic priority. While methamphetamine was first synthesized in Japan decades earlier, it was German scientists who mastered its mass production and, more critically, envisioned its power as a consumer product. Temmler-Werk patented Pervitin in 1937, presenting it not as a dangerous narcotic, but as a remedy for depression, narcolepsy, and chronic fatigue. In a stroke of marketing genius, it was classified as an enhancer, not a pharmaceutical, allowing it to be sold without a prescription in any German pharmacy. An extraordinarily sophisticated advertising campaign was unleashed, weaving the drug into the very fabric of modern life. Advertisements in newspapers, women's magazines, and medical journals portrayed Pervitin as the chemical key to overcoming human weakness. The slogans were perfectly aligned with the regime's values of unwavering strength and efficiency. "One pill keeps Germany awake," declared a medical journal. "Conquer fatigue, conquer weakness," another urged. The imagery was of intensely focused men and women, their eyes bright and postures rigid, the very picture of the productive, ever-vigilant citizen idealized by the state. Temmler's publicists shrewdly identified target markets for their miracle pill. For housewives, there was Hausfrau Schokolade, chocolates laced with Pervitin, offered as a pleasant lift for grueling days. For executives, it promised mental clarity and a ruthless competitive edge. For students, it offered the ability to study through the night, a guarantee of academic success. For the industrial workers fueling Germany's rearmament, it meant longer shifts and tireless precision. The response was immediate and overwhelming. In 1938, its first full year on the market, over 27 million Pervitin tablets were sold. By the following year, that number climbed to 35 million, not including direct sales to the military. In the social circles of Berlin, the drug became so common, it earned nicknames like the Hitler pill or German Coke. Its success built on a sinister collaboration between industry and medicine. Temmler-Werk generously funded studies that, predictably, emphasized the drug's benefits while minimizing its long-term risks. In 1938, the esteemed Deutsche Medizinische Wochenschrift published an article by Fritz Hauschild himself, the compound's developer. He concluded that Pervitin showed no significant addictive effects and could be considered safe for regular use. Other sponsored research suggested astonishing benefits: heightened intellect, increased physical endurance, and a reduced need for sleep, all with no apparent downside. It was a promise of superhuman efficiency, a perfect drug for a nation marching toward war. Beneath the polished surface of National Socialist ideology, a chemical pulse began to beat. The relationship between the Temmler-Werk company and the regime was symbiotic, a dark pact sealed from the very beginning. The firm offered a substance that mirrored the party's own gospel of relentless productivity, iron discipline, and manufactured self-improvement. In exchange, the state became its greatest facilitator, ensuring mass distribution while shielding the company from a rising tide of medical criticism. This official protection proved essential as the first cracks in the miracle began to show. By late 1939, whispers of concern grew louder as doctors across Germany reported patients with alarming symptoms. They saw severe tachycardia, chronic insomnia, and harrowing weight loss, alongside the unmistakable signs of profound psychological and physical dependence. These were not isolated incidents, they were a gathering storm. At Berlin's prestigious Charité Hospital, neurologist Dr. Heinz Kuhner documented cases of toxic psychosis directly linked to prolonged Pervitin use. In a confidential report to the Ministry of Health, he described once stable individuals spiraling into erratic behavior, haunted by persecutory delusions and vivid hallucinations. But these warnings were systematically buried. When Dr. Kuhner tried to publish his findings, he received a quiet visit from officials from the propaganda ministry, who advised him to focus his research elsewhere. Other doctors raising similar alarms found their careers obstructed, some even facing investigation for unpatriotic activities. Reich Health Minister Leonardo Conti, a high-ranking SS officer, understood the danger. In a closed-door meeting in 1940, he voiced his fear that widespread stimulant use could inflict lasting damage on German racial health. Yet, Conti was caught between ideology and utility, facing immense pressure from military and industrial leaders who saw Pervitin as a non-negotiable strategic asset. The eventual compromise, reached in 1941, was a masterpiece of contradiction. Pervitin was moved behind the pharmacy counter, requiring a prescription for civilian sale, yet it remained freely available to the armed forces, its use left entirely to the discretion of military doctors. This ambiguous regulation exposed the hollow core of the Nazi system, a state that preached biological purity while actively pursuing policies that ravaged the population's health for immediate battlefield gains. The drug's journey from a commercial product to a strategic weapon was methodical. It began in the sterile laboratories of the Berlin Institute of Military Physiology, where Dr. Otto Ranke sought to scientifically overcome the limits of human endurance. A respected scientist and fervent patriot, Ranke believed pharmacology was the key to modern warfare. His initial experiments on medical students yielded what appeared to be miraculous results. After 24 hours without sleep, volunteers given methamphetamine maintained near normal levels of concentration, while the placebo group showed severe cognitive decline. By the Western Campaign of 1940, Pervitin was fully integrated into the military supply chain. Temmler-Werk even developed specialized branding, Flieger Schokolade, or aviator's chocolate for pilots on long missions, and Panzer Schokolade, a higher dose for tank crews. For dive bomber pilots, there were Stuka Tabletten, sustained release capsules promising prolonged stimulation. As the war ground on and methamphetamine use became endemic in the military, a tense debate flared within the regime. Leonardo Conti, once a reluctant facilitator, now fought to restrict the drug's deployment, but met fierce opposition from commanders in the field. In a March 1942 memorandum, Conti warned that the continued use of stimulants was producing visible physical deterioration in veteran units. He proposed mandatory rest periods and limits on cumulative doses, but his pleas were dismissed. The response from the front was blunt. General Heinz Guderian retorted that theoretical medical concerns must be subordinated to immediate tactical needs. A commander on the Eastern Front put it more starkly: "When the Russians are within 100 meters of our positions, we will discuss the long-term effects. In the meantime, we need men awake and alert." This conflict laid bare a fundamental hypocrisy. Official ideology glorified natural health, yet battlefield practice treated soldiers like machines to be chemically tuned for maximum efficiency. Joseph Goebbels himself embodied this ambivalence. In a 1943 speech to pharmaceutical workers, he praised German ingenuity for overcoming natural limitations, yet, in the same breath, he warned against a dependence on artificial substances that could undermine the inherent strength of German blood. On the home front, German women, burdened with overwhelming wartime responsibilities, found their own solution in Hausfrau Schokolade, or housewife's chocolate. A Dresden woman confided in her diary. With her morning tablet, she could manage the house, care for her children, and work 6 hours in a factory. Without it, she confessed, she would simply collapse. University students, especially in medicine and engineering, were another group with staggering rates of consumption. A 1942 internal report from the University of Munich noted with alarm that 60% of advanced students were using stimulants to keep up with grueling study schedules. Yet it concluded that ending the practice would cripple the output of graduates essential to the war effort. The drug's influence seeped into the very language of the Reich. Phrases like "take a higher gear" or "turn on the turbo" became common euphemisms for taking methamphetamine. By encouraging this pharmacological culture, the Nazi regime had engineered a society where artificial efficiency had supplanted natural productivity. Pervitin was the fuel that kept a social and military machine running, even as it was strained to the breaking point by the demands of an unwinnable war. The historical irony is staggering. The same regime that outlawed tobacco as a poison and restricted alcohol for reasons of biological purity had turned Germany into a nation functionally addicted to methamphetamine, chemically corrupting the very bodies its ideology sought to exalt. In the smoldering ruins of Berlin, an empire of ash and memory, a strange legacy endured. While the Third Reich's monuments crumbled and its leaders met their end in subterranean bunkers, one of its most potent creations was poised for a second life. Not an ideology, not a weapon of steel, but a small white tablet. This pill, Pervitin, would outlive the regime that championed it, its chemical formula destined to reappear in new forms for decades to come, consumed by millions entirely unaware of its origins. With Germany's final defeat in 1945, a frantic clandestine race began. While the world's attention was fixed on the Nuremberg trials, Allied intelligence agencies scrambled to capture the intellectual capital of the vanquished nation. Famed programs like America's Operation Paperclip and the Soviet Operation Oso-Aviakim are remembered for securing rocket engineers, but their nets were cast far wider. They also ensnared medical and pharmaceutical specialists, the very minds behind Germany's experiments with combat stimulants. Decades later, partially declassified files from Operation Paperclip would begin to tell the story. They revealed that between 1945 and 1959, at least 58 scientists from military pharmacology programs were quietly relocated to the United States. Among them were men who had worked directly on the development and testing of Pervitin for both military and civilian use. One such figure was Dr. Friedrich Hoffmann, formerly of the Berlin Institute of Military Physiology, where he had collaborated with Dr. Otto Ranke on the limits of human performance under stimulants. Having carefully sidestepped direct ties to the horrors of the concentration camps, Hoffmann was given a new identity and a new purpose. He was integrated into the U.S. Air Force Medical Research Program at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, where the subject of his work remained disturbingly familiar. There, he continued to investigate the effects of stimulants on pilots at high altitudes, applying the very knowledge forged in the crucible of war. His reports, now meticulously drafted in English and with all troublesome references to his past work erased, became foundational to the medication programs for American aviators in the conflicts that lay ahead. But the transfer of knowledge was not confined to the minds of men. Vast archives from the Temmler-Werk, the Institute of Military Physiology, and other German research centers were seized and meticulously analyzed by Allied teams. A 1947 U.S. military intelligence report called the captured documents a goldmine of empirical data, information on stimulants that would have taken years and millions of dollars to replicate under the ethical constraints of peacetime. So, as Europe began the slow work of rebuilding from the rubble, a quiet evolution was underway in American pharmaceutical labs. Drawing in part from this captured German knowledge, but operating within a new commercial landscape, chemists began to develop new stimulants. These emerging drugs shared the fundamental chemical architecture of Pervitin, yet they were presented to the world with a polished, radically different identity. The shadow of the past was being repackaged for a new generation. In the quiet aftermath of global conflict, the chemical tools of war did not simply vanish. They shed their martial skin, re-emerging in new, more palatable forms for a world eager to forget. In the late 1940s, a drug called Obitrol appeared on the American market, presented by its creators as a modern treatment for obesity. Within its initial formulation, however, was a mixture of amphetamine salts that included methamphetamine, making its chemical parallels to Pervitin undeniable to any chemist who cared to look. While the core substance was the same, its marketing was a world away. Where Nazi propaganda had championed tireless productivity, American advertising targeted body image and the anxieties of a new consumer culture. Obitrol became a commercial sensation, liberally prescribed by physicians to a growing demographic of overweight Americans. Through the 1950s and 60s, millions of people, from housewives and executives to artists and students, regularly consumed a reformulated version of the very stimulant that had once fueled the Blitzkrieg. A 1962 advertisement perfectly captured this cultural shift, revealing a smiling, slender woman who declared she had the energy to maintain her figure and still manage her home and family, all thanks to Obitrol. The promise was fundamentally identical to that of the Nazi-era chocolate bars, to conquer the body's natural limitations with chemical intervention. The stated goal, however, had transformed from military production to aesthetic perfection. But a shadow of scrutiny was beginning to fall over the celebrated pill. That history took a decisive turn in 1973, when a comprehensive review by the Food and Drug Administration cast serious doubt on Obitrol's efficacy and safety. The company was compelled to reformulate the product, removing methamphetamine from its composition, but keeping its other amphetamine compounds. In the years that followed, through corporate changes and acquisitions, this evolving formula would eventually become the drug known today as Adderall. Approved in 1996 for the treatment of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, Adderall represents the final stage of this pharmacological evolution. Though modified, it maintains the essential active ingredients, amphetamine stimulants, that sharpen focus and diminish fatigue. The contrast in its use is profound. What began as a tool of war designed to forge sleepless soldiers was now a medical treatment administered to millions in schools and offices. The German military's methamphetamine had completed its metamorphosis, finding its new purpose as a response to the pressures of the information society. The war's end did not exorcise its chemical ghosts. In the decades that followed, the transformation of society rippled outward, touching everything, including the very nature of modern warfare. This transformation was not confined to the civilian world. The United States Air Force, among other military branches, quietly continued to employ amphetamine derivatives for specialized missions. During the Korean War from 1950 to 1953, and more intensely in the jungles of Vietnam, American troops were regularly issued dexedrine. This powerful stimulant allowed soldiers to push past the limits of human exhaustion, to remain alert and operational under the most grueling conditions. Decades later, a declassified report from the Gulf War of 1990 to 1991 revealed an even more refined system. Pilots flying F-15 and F-16 jets on extended sorties received go pills to maintain peak performance, followed by no-go pills to induce rest. This cycle of controlled stimulation and sedation was a protocolized echo of the very principles pioneered by German military doctors 50 years prior. History possesses a chilling sense of irony. While the monstrous crimes of Nazism were universally condemned, some of its pharmacological innovations were silently absorbed into modern military and medical practice. Stripped of their original context and sanitized with new names, their fundamental purpose remained intact, raising deeply troubling questions about the ethics of progress. The case of Dr. Felix Hoffmann embodies the moral complexities of this transfer. After supervising horrific endurance experiments on prisoners at the Sachsenhausen camp, forcing them to march on varying doses of Pervitin, he vanished. Using falsified papers, Hoffmann emigrated to South America, re-emerging as a respected consultant for pharmaceutical firms developing cognitive enhancers. When Nazi hunters finally unmasked him in 1978, his defense was cold and clinical. Science, he argued, transcends politics. His discoveries, born in unimaginable cruelty, now benefited patients of all nationalities. While his justification was rejected, it mirrored the pragmatic institutional attitude that had allowed Nazi pharmacological knowledge to quietly endure. Beyond the battlefield, amphetamines derived from this German research found new life in the pressures of contemporary society. In the hyper-competitive halls of academia, Drugs like Adderall became clandestine tools for students desperate for an edge. By 2012, studies suggested that up to 30% of students at elite universities were using such stimulants without a diagnosis, chasing focus through a chemical shortcut. In the glowing innovation hubs of Silicon Valley, a similar phenomenon took root among programmers and entrepreneurs. Nootropics, substances marketed to improve cognitive function, became commonplace. Though often presented as benign supplements, many contained derivatives whose lineage could be traced directly back to the laboratories of 1930s Germany. This trend blurred the line between legitimate medical treatment and the engineered enhancement of human performance. The evolution from Pervitin to Adderall was more than a story of chemical continuity. It reflected a profound shift in how our culture defines productivity and the acceptable limits of intervention. The Nazis sought a super soldier for their war machine. The modern economy sought an ultra-focused student, a tireless worker. This disturbing parallel forces a difficult question. How far have we truly moved beyond the instrumental view of the human body that defined the Third Reich? While its ideology is rightly abhorred, our society has normalized subtler yet conceptually related forms of chemical optimization. The most unsettling legacy of Pervitin is not the drug itself, but the persistence of the idea that inspired it. It is the idea that the human body's natural limits are a problem to be solved by technology, that our biology is something to be overcome rather than respected. When a university student takes a pill to pull an all-nighter, they are an unwitting participant in a tradition that began in the darkest corners of Nazi Germany. The context is radically different, but the impulse to subordinate human well-being to external demands remains unnervingly similar. Pervitin was not just a drug that fueled a war and consumed its soldiers from within. It was the first mass experiment in chemically engineering human potential, an experiment whose echoes now resonate in the millions of pills consumed for functionally similar goals. As a society, we continue the search for that perfect chemical key, the one that will unlock our limitations, allowing us to work longer, rest less, and focus beyond our natural means.